Welcome back. In this video, we're basically going to do the same thing we did in the last video with users and comments, but we're going to do it for users and campgrounds. There are two main ideas. The first is that we don't want someone submitting a new campground if they're not signed in. We don't want anyone just to go and create a campground unless they have an account. Anyone can view the campgrounds, anyone can read comments, but you can't submit a new campground or a new comment unless you're signed in. And the second one is not only do we want to make sure you're signed in, but we also want to save who you are, your username and ID, to the newly created campground, just like we did for the comments, so that on a campground show page, we can show who created it, created by Potato, created by Rusty. And then that also has implications later on for who can delete particular comments or campgrounds, and we need the ID and the username for that to work. We'll start with the easy part, which is preventing someone who's not logged in from creating a campground. So we need to open up the campground routes, which are instead of routes, campground.js. And the important routes here are the create route and the new route. We don't want a user to be able to see the form if they're not logged in, and we definitely don't want them to be able to actually create one if they're not logged in. And really, there's no way most users would ever get to this point if they're not using the form, but technically someone could send a request from Postman or something and still add something to our database if they're not logged in. So we want to protect the post route and the get route, and this is by far the more important one as far as most of our users are concerned. But both of them, we want to make sure you have to be signed in to access. And we've already defined that code is logged in, the middleware, and I'm just going to copy it over. So that's from comments.js or from index.js. Both of them have is logged in. And we'll go back now to campground.js and just add that at the bottom, and then we'll use that in those routes. So here, instead of new, I want to make sure you are logged in, just like that. And same thing here, is logged in, and we'll save. Great, let's fire up the server and give it a shot. Node app.js, go to /campgrounds, and we have no campgrounds right now, which is fine, it doesn't matter. All we want to do is try and add one, and I'm not logged in right now, so I should see the login form, which is working just fine because of this is logged in middleware. It's redirecting me to /login. Now let's sign up, and I'll sign up here as Carrot. Now let's try and add a new campground, and I can now view the form. Excellent. Now let's get to the more difficult /fun part, which is associating the currently logged in user with this new campground. So in this case, if I created a campground and hit submit, right now it's just created on its own. It has nothing to do with any user data, but we want to save Carrot's username and Carrot's ID to that campground. The way that we'll accomplish that is pretty much the same way we did it for comments. We'll have to alter the campground schema to start. And before I go any further, I forgot to mention at the beginning that I am in v9 now, so if you are following along, these changes are in version 9. All right, so let's open up the models that we need, which is just campground.js, and we'll add in basically the same thing we added to comment, where we now have author, and we could call this user, author, it doesn't really matter. I'll just go with author to be consistent, and inside of author, we have an ID, which is an object, and then we have username, which is a string. And then ID has type, which is that long thing, mongoose.schema.types.object ID. And then the reference is going to be user, just like that. And we'll save. We need a comma here. Let's see, we need a comma here as well. Okay, so we save. Now what we'll need to do is set up the logic instead of our campground create. So when a campground is created, we want to take the current user's ID and the current user's username and save them into the author on that campground. And that will work pretty much the same way that it worked for comment as well. So let's go to the campground route, and then we need to find create, which is right here, router.post / which remember is actually /campgrounds, because in our app.js we have this line here. So when this route comes in, we're grabbing the data, name, image, description. We're making a new campground there. So before we actually edit this data, let me do another one of those console.logs of request.user. And this should be review from the last video. Request.user contains the information about the currently logged in user. And if there is no currently logged in user, it will be empty, except there's no way we can get to this point unless someone's logged in because of this is logged in middleware. Okay, so let's save, and we should expect to see request.user. So I'll Control C, restart, and this happens when we create a campground. Now let's go and test it out. Create a campground, have an image here, and the campground name will be Deserty Desert. And description will just be hot, dry, deserty, like that. And we'll submit. And I do need to be logged in first. All right, so let's log in as Carrot. Password is password. Now let's add a new campground again. Paste that image in. Deserty, desert, hot, dry, deserty. Now we create a campground, and that works fine. But let's take a look at our console and see if our user was printed out. And as you can see, it was right here. So we have username Carrot, ID 562, blah, 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 the hexadecimal ID. Okay, now we want to take that data and save it into new campground. And we could do it like this, where we say new campground.author.id equals, and then new campground.author.username equals, but I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to show you a slightly cleaner way, in my opinion, which is we're going to make an object here called var author. And inside of that, we're going to have ID and username. And ID will be request.user._ID, this right here. And username will be request.user.username. And we need a comma. You can see it's complaining, which is nice that we get that. We'll save. And then we just need to pass this author into the new campground when we're creating it. So we can just do that like that, right there. And then we don't have to do anything else because we're already passing in new campground to our .create. So let me get rid of this now, console.log. We're now adding in that user data and we should be good. So let's see how it goes. And to make sure that it works, let's do a console.log here of that campground, which we're calling newly created. That's what's coming back from the database. And hopefully we see our author data in there as well. So restart, make yet another campground, and I will have to log in, which is always frustrating to do on a screencast, but it's what we're actually testing here, so I have to. There's no way around that. Password. Now we're logged in. Now we'll add a new campground. We'll use the same image URL, and we'll call this one Desert 2 Gibberish. Submit. Okay. Now let's see what we get here. Perfect. You can see that we have comments is empty. We have the ID, description, the image, the name, and then author, which has username, Carrot, and ID 562, blah, 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 that whole hexadecimal ID. Perfect. So that's working exactly how it should. The very last thing that we can do is display that on the show page. So if I go to one of these show pages, we could just have it print out right here, submitted by Colt, submitted by Rusty, or submitted by Potato. So let's do that. That's our show template. So we want to open that up inside of views, campgrounds, show. And then we have access to that because it's inside of campground.author.username. And I'll just do that by adding another paragraph in here. And then inside we need our EJS tags. And we want campground.author.username, which is this right here. This whole thing is campground. We want .author.username Carrot. And rather than just printing out Carrot, let's do submitted by and then Carrot. And let's also make this italicized. And we can do that. Let's indent, add some space here. There we go. And then I'll put EM tags around this, which remember are for emphasis. Technically, it's not about italicizing. It's supposed to be something that is meaningful or that's emphasized on our page. and it just happens to be italicized by default. So let's save, restart the server, and we won't have to log in this time to see if it worked. If I just refresh the page, we get submitted by Carrot. Excellent. Same thing here. We don't actually have author saved to that one. So let's make a new one, sign up again, and our username here will be Rocketman. Password, once again, it's just password. Let's sign up and then add a new campground and just make sure it works. So we'll use the same image, and this one will just be blah blah, and description is also blah blah. Let's submit now, and let's take a look at it. There we go, submitted by Rocketman. Great, so that's everything I wanted to get done in this lesson. I wanted to start by making sure that a user cannot create a campground unless they're logged in. So you have to be logged in to actually create a new campground, which was a pretty easy fix. We just had to add in our middleware is logged in. And then the second thing we did was actually updating the campground schema so it now has author with a username and an ID. And then we just populate that inside of the create when you create a new campground. And then finally, we displayed it on the show page, campground.author.username.